E3 2016 started off on a pretty high note. Microsoft announced Dead Rising 4, and it looks to have pretty much everything I could want in a Dead Rising sequel. A new mall, the ability to explore the town of Willamette, the setting from the first game, the return of the always popular character Frank West in the role as the playable character, and it looks like an actual sequel to Dead Rising 3. Suffice it to say, I was hyped for what Capcom had next. It was very heavily rumored that Resident Evil 7 was going to be shown off at this year's E3. So I watched the remainder of the Microsoft press conference. No Resident Evil 7. I watched the Sony press conference, and while there were quite a few good games being shown off there, the new God of War looks very interesting. The game that has Starkiller in it as well looks fairly interesting. Then about halfway through, they showed a trailer for what I perceived as a very generic, very boring-looking Outlast-type game. A very generic, run-of-the-mill, standard horror game. And I actually turned to my friend about halfway through the trailer and said, you know, I'm gonna laugh if this turns out to be Resident Evil 7, thinking that there's no way they would turn Resident Evil into a first-person PT Outlast clone. And much to my dismay, of course, that's what happened. So, I had some time to reflect on it. I've rewatched the trailer many times, and there are things that I'm very unhappy with, and there are things that I am very happy with. As Resident Evil is my favorite franchise in gaming, I figured I'd have to make this video. I did one on Dead Rising, the Dead Rising 4 announcement trailer, but this one's going to be a little bit more, I guess, planned out. This one's going to be me speaking a little bit more from the heart. So, what I love about Resident Evil are the characters. I love the characters, and I love the story. I love Chris Redfield, I love Leon, I love Jill, I love Wesker, I love Barry, I love Rebecca. I can go on and on. The Resident Evil franchise has had some of the greatest characters to ever be featured in a video game. And it looks like we are completely ditching every single main character from a Resident Evil game. Which can be okay, because going back to Dead Rising, I had the same initial knee-jerk reaction to Dead Rising 2 that I did with Resident Evil 7. Frank's not in this game? I don't want to play it. Who's this jerk-off? And of course, Chuck became my favorite character in Dead Rising. I prefer him over Frank sometimes, because I think he is, while he's not funnier than Frank West for the most part, he is a better character. He had a better story, what with his daughter needing Zombrex, and he had a relationship formed with Stacy. And overall, I ended up liking Chuck better than I like Frank West. So who knows? Maybe some of the new characters introduced in this game can be just as iconic as Chris or Jill or Leon. And of course, you know, we have like a 2-minute trailer to base anything on, so I don't know. So I've seen a lot of hypocrisy in the Resident Evil fandom. Of course, I feel like I've said this before, but the Resident Evil fanbase are some of the most hypocritical, whiny fans. I'm sure I'm going to make some people mad by saying that, but for the most part, it's true. They are the kind of people that will say, oh, we need this to go back to its horror roots, and then when they do that with this Resident Evil 7 trailer, they complain about it. They say, oh, it's in first person, it's got, you know, weird stuff in it. There is no pleasing the Resident Evil fan base at all. I am someone who likes to go with the flow. If a new game comes out, I'm grateful for it, because there are other franchises that I know will never get sequels. Games like Haunting Ground, Sleeping Dogs, so on and so forth. So whenever I get a sequel to a game in one of my favorite franchises, I'm grateful, even if it looks like crap. So, Resident Evil 7 is a first-person game. This is going to go back to me talking about how I love the characters. In Resident Evil, I like seeing the characters because I have formed a connection with these characters. Maybe because I've seen them so often is why I have a connection with those characters. Having it be so that all you see is their hands and maybe you'll see their faces in a cutscene is kind of limiting. I would much rather this be a third-person action game, but I'm not too mad because, again, I'm sure that there were people complaining about the same thing when Resident Evil 4 switched to the over-the-shoulder view. So I'm open to it, but for right now, I'm not too sold on it. Which will bring me to the demo. They released, for PlayStation Plus members, the Resident Evil 7 first hour demo or something like that. And I've played it. It's about 10 to 15 minutes long, depending on, I guess, how much you want to soak it in. But I beat it in about 10 minutes. There are things in it that I liked, and a few things in it that I didn't like. I really liked, if you've played it, you know that you collect a tape, you put it in a VHS player, and then in that you control the person in the VHS, and you get shown the solution to a puzzle in that tape that you can then use in the real world. I think that's cool. That's a unique puzzle. I don't think that's ever been done in a Resident Evil game before. Although, again, it feels a little too much like Outlast, which is a game that I think is really dumb and not scary. And I know everyone thinks that that game is really scary, and unfortunately it seems like they're taking a bit of inspiration from Outlast. If you're going to make a Resident Evil game inspired by another first-person horror game, I would suggest Alien Isolation, which is... I don't get scared in video games, but that is one of the most tense video games I've ever played, and I've never had that kind of sensation in a video game before. And if they were to do that, where it's pretty much like you have no weapon, that would be great. Kind of like a first-person Haunting Ground or Clock Tower. Now, the demo wasn't scary, like, at all. It feels like PT, but it doesn't fuck with your head. There is one scare in particular, massive air quotes on scare, that you have to, find a pair of, bolt cutters inside of a cow or something. I don't know what's going on in this house. But once you pick them up, a baby drops from the ceiling. They try and spook you with a baby. You look up, and there's nowhere that this baby could have come from. So it really makes no sense. And then they do the exact same thing later on with a mannequin. They just throw a mannequin at you. And those are the two scares in the demo. Now, like I said, there are a few other things that I liked about it. I did actually enjoy the premise of the VHS tape. It's someone recording two other guys who seem like they're, ghost investigators or whatever, like you'd see on a cheesy show like that. And they kind of get themselves into some trouble. There is one genuinely really kind of creepy part in this demo, and it happens with these guys.
Still. We gotta get the hell out of here. Come on.
The game controls well enough It doesn't feel too intuitive, but I like the amount of interaction, which will probably play into a lot of the puzzles, because it looks like you can interact with mostly everything in here. You can open up the fridge, you can open up drawers, you can open up cabinets. So in that respect, I'm excited to see where they go with the puzzle element of the game. Story-wise, the thing that I want them to do the least is kind of make this as like a soft reboot of the series. I feel like that's kind of what they're doing with the title. It's called Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, which is a very meta title. I actually feel like Biohazard Resident Evil would have been better. Hey, wait a minute. Did you notice that the end of evil, the VIL, looks like a 7 if you take away the L part? That's actually really brilliant, and I like that quite a bit. But they've said that this game, I think, either takes place before or after Resident Evil 6. I think in a blog post, a Capcom employee said that it takes place after 6, which is interesting. And that brings me to my next point. This is something I've said, I've said it in a video before, but I've been saying this for a few years, that if Resident Evil really wants to, like, do something different and bring new scares to the table, what they gotta do is ghosts. Zombies are overplayed, they haven't been scary in forever, because, you know, Capcom is gonna release a game like Dead Rising 4, where the main character is wearing a power suit and he's tearing apart zombies and picking up chunks of the earth and you know, swinging it around. And then we're supposed to be afraid of zombies a couple months later when they release Resident Evil 7. Like, that just doesn't fly. You can't do that. You have to bring in something intangible that can spook you and that is not easily killed. You gotta bring in ghosts. I have a feeling, though, that the ghosts are going to be some sort of BOW, some sort of bioorganic weapon created by the family or whatever the main antagonists of the game will be. There's no confirmation yet that it's ghosts, but there's a lot of hints, like I said before. There's guys going into this house that are like ghost hunters, and there is a screenshot from the trailer that shows a newspaper that says, like, ghosts found in Bayou. And yeah, I have a feeling that the ghosts are going to be a red herring, and that they're actually going to be some sort of bioorganic weapon, some sort of new creature. I'm hoping that Umbrella is involved somehow with this, because again, in the trailer you see a guy in a wheelchair that I've seen a lot of people say is Oswald Spencer, which doesn't make sense because, I mean, Wesker kind of like murdered that guy. So I'm curious to see where the story goes. I'm curious to see if it's going to have any ties whatsoever with other Resident Evil games. So as of right now, I am actually more excited for Dead Rising 4 than I am for Resident Evil 7, which is a shame, because the initial response that I have of Resident Evil 7 is cautiously optimistic. I'm more of a fan of the third-person over-the-shoulder games that are really fun, kind of goofy B-movie stories than I am of, let's make this dark and gritty and it's gotta be super scary. You know, give me Resident Evil 4 or 5 or Revelations over this Outlast-looking game any day of the week. But it's a Resident Evil game. Of course I'm gonna play it. I just kind of wanted to get my thoughts out there so that I can maybe look back on this in a year when it comes out and I either really love it or really hate it. But honestly, I think the one thing that's going to push me over one way or the other is probably going to be Resident Evil Umbrella Corps. Comes out, I think, in a week, the day before my birthday. So I'll be picking that up. I'll probably be playing that. And if it's any good, because I know that's like a first-person shooter game, if it's good, I'll have faith that they can create a good first-person Resident Evil experience. And if it's no good, again, who am I kidding? I'm going to pick up Resident Evil 7 anyway. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you did, hope you all had an enjoyable E3 and maybe you got a better experience out of it than I did.